Good evening, everyone. Good evening, and welcome to another week of Drama is Life, where we discuss what was in history, what is possibly going on right now, or what could affect you in the future regarding mental and social issues. So, we discuss those topics as a free service to you, just to give you some information. This is not a therapy session, but it's to give you information to be able to use that to be able to help navigate your life just a little bit better. And it's also to help you be able to manage if there is something that you are needing further than what we are offering here. Then we do offer services individually, in person or telehealth or on what we call online, or we do offer group services as well. If we're not the service for you, that's okay. We are definitely able and willing to help you find that provider um, that would be able to do that for you. So, welcome again. This is another Drama is Life with me, Theresa White. I am the CEO and founder of Creative Counseling Services. I'm a licensed mental health counselor and a registered drama therapist, among a few other titles. But tonight I wanted to have a conversation. Um, excuse me, and I'm gonna let you know this is going to be one of those improv conversations because this was not what I planned to talk about tonight, but I think it's definitely needed because it's being present. Let me just say present. So, as you saw, the topic for tonight, we're going to talk about grief. We have not talked about grief in a few months. And I know that periodically I do hit on grief and we'll review that, those topics. But tonight I think it's definitely appropriate to talk about grief because of just some personal conversations and experiences that I have had just in the last week. So, um, all of us have experienced grief at one point in time in our life, whether we have lost a loved one, um, whether family, friend, you have lost a relationship, a bond with somebody, or that relationship ended, a job, something important has shifted or changed in your life. And so that can bring up what we would call emotions or feelings regarding grief. Or related to grief. And so I just want to have just a conversation about it. I want to talk about good evening to everybody who is joining. If you're watching the live, thank you so much for joining and supporting. You can definitely catch us weekly. You can always like, subscribe to the page, and what we talk about, you will be able to see those every time that they come up. So there are many different responses. So if you have heard me talk about grief in the past, you know that there are many different responses. Generally, you may hear of Kubler-Ross's stages, or what they call the 5 stages of grief. Um, Grief is not necessarily in stages 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and they are never clean that way. But there are stages or responses, I like to call them responses to grief. And so I just want to talk about one of those. So, in a conversation that I was having with my husband actually last week, we were just talking about some loved ones that have passed away in the past several years of our life and just our own personal responses to those, just in a regular conversation. Or maybe not regular, but just in a conversation. And so um, it made me think about that because it's not only come up when I talked about it with him, but when other people talked about it. And that response is generally numbness. So the feeling of being numb. And so let me explain that feeling that you care about what has happened or the news that you were um, given, but your system, as we call the body, emotion, our mind, our heart, the system just is not responding the way you think it should. It's, people may be around you crying or maybe angry. They may be having different emotions. And sometimes it's like you don't feel anything. You are in disbelief. um, and I say that because I got some news about a loved one this past weekend. And my initial response was like, And sometimes numbness can come up like you're asking questions, and it can mirror denial, but it's not the same as denial. Numbness is not even having a response at all. You just are sitting there still trying to actually allow the information to hit your system that this has happened or that this has occurred, this loss has happened. And sometimes it's not happening. And I will, as I was explaining to when I was talking to my husband about actually our former first lady, our pastor's wife who had passed away, and a really close mother of ours. I mean, a lot of people in our church passed away in very short periods of time. Um, and so the responses sometimes definitely happen, or the different responses, or feeling this numb response can happen depending on where you were when you heard the information, what was happening emotionally for you when you heard the information. So the same way when we talk about any response, generally it's predicated on what is happening in my environment before I even get it, and how did I find out? And that can definitely have an effect on how you respond. And so, a few people that I've talked about with my husband, or that we were talking about that we have lost over the years, and just our responses actually were very similar. That we really were just sitting there trying to register in our mind the information that was just given to us, and really trying to allow it to download. And that's the best way I can explain it. Really trying to allow it to hit your system. And sometimes when people have a numb response, I want to first tell you right now to give yourself grace. Grief does not have there's a books that tell you, kind of how to manage, but nobody can really give you the step by step to how to manage emotions or how you're going to respond. You don't know because you are not usually prepared. Even when you know that someone may be ill or about to pass away, or they are at the end of their life, and may happen. And even as I think about as a grandparent, as I talked to you guys about earlier, of my grandmother passing away, she lived a long life, lived well, but still hearing the information, I was still, my response to my loved one who told me was, "No, you're not serious." And of course, they got upset at me. And I'm like, "No, I'm not meaning that to be rude, but that's just my brain trying to allow the information, my system trying to allow that the pain of that reality to hit me." Um, and sometimes that's the numbness is there because it's your system is like, I don't, it's a safety mechanism. I'm not trying to allow the pain to hit me. I don't want this reality to be reality. I don't want this to be the case. And so I can't handle it at this moment. And so it's kind of like you kind of just go zonk, or what we say is kind of like people call it, um, what's the word I'm looking for? Where people like daydream or kind of like mentally leave. That's sometimes how your system is. Like your nerves are like, I can't take that in. That may be too heavy for us at this moment. I need a slower time, or give me some time to kind of process that. And so sometimes you are just sitting there for days, hours. Some people for the first few hours they're numb. Um, some people for the first few days, some people for the first few weeks, even throughout if they have a home going or a funeral service, can still feel numb to the reality that this person is no longer with you. And so it's really hard because your system is like, I don't want the reality of this pain, and I'm trying to protect myself from taking all of that in at once. And so it kind of, gives you doses. And so as you're processing of like, and and ways to help with the numbness, because numbness depends on your own system. And so with information that I have heard um, recently, not only just in this past week of a loved one, um, but just even I looked at my past in general, just past history, my initial response, as some people's initial response may be to start crying. My initial response is really just trying to take in the information. Did I hear that right? That can't be true. And so sometimes, as I was saying before, you kind of wave into numbness to denial. And denial is not like it's another way of like your system not trying to receive the pain, or the impact of the pain, of the perceived impact of the pain, but it just may be, I don't want this to be true. I don't want this to be true. So yes, correct. Definitely that you're rejecting the pain. Very correct, Mary Kay, that you're rejecting the pain, and that it's your system is again trying to protect you. So when we talk about the function of the brain, and even when regarding trauma, is that sometimes when it comes to, and a lot of times when it comes to grief, it typically is with trauma. For some people to be able to hear that, depending on where you were, how you were feeling. There's been times that I have heard um, of the loss of a loved one just waking up out of sleep, or first thing in the morning, when that's the first message that you may hear. Sometimes you may hear it when you're in the middle of a really, really good feeling or a really good time. And it doesn't matter either way, or how the person may feel it. It depends on how their system may take it. But where you hear it can definitely affect whether you feel numb, whether you feel angry, sad, etc. Um, and so I just wanted to have a conversation about that. Um, that numbness is a response to grief, and it is actually a common response. More people than not have a numbness to the effect or the news of losing a loved one, and especially the numbness can come depending on how tragic the information or how tragic the situation was. So if it was like a homicide, a suicide, it was abrupt, um, or death is never convenient, loss is never convenient. But it depends on, again, opposed to or compared to a grandmother or a grandparent who is 101 years old. Yes, it still may hurt. You still may miss that person, but you can typically take in that news, take in that information when you know that they've lived a good life, and they're like, okay, they live long and they are ready to go. As some people may say about, their grandparents or loved ones who are typically past 90. People are like, well, they were older. Yes, it still hurts me. I still miss them, miss, their laugh, their cooking, their conversation, etc. But they lived. And so you typically that can come in, so you can take that in a little bit better. It's harder to take when it's a young person. It's harder to take when it's tragic. Um, and sometimes when it's tragic, that's when that numb feeling can show up for a lot of people. And I've heard of many, and even had people when it comes to suicide, when it comes to homicide, and I've had a few family members that have been taken from us for homicide, um, and I don't think I ever get used to hearing that information, and so I'm just gonna have a vulnerable moment with you all. That just is, it's just hard to hear. Um, and every person that I'm remembering even now, of the news that was heard, was a young person, and they were young men, young men. Um, I have had some loved ones who have passed away by suicide as well, which is why I'm so passionate about crisis and trauma, to be able to help those before they get to that place. Because again, that news and the effect of hearing that is, there's no words for it. And of course, those who experience grief and have experienced that, there's not words for the effect that has. And so I just want you to know that grace is present to be here for you during this moment. Um, if there's a moment of grief, if there's days of grief, hours of grief, or numbness, to allow your system to just kind of settle, because it's protecting you for a reason. It's bringing that protection, or that, what we say, that block is, rejection, for a reason. Um, But I do want to say don't stay in numbness, because again, in any response of grief or any response to anything, a continuation of anything for a long period of time is not good for anybody, anyone's system. Even when we talk about what we would consider a positive emotion, which there's no such thing as a positive emotion, but what people may consider a positive emotion like happiness or excitement, continued happiness, continued excitement for a long period of time is not healthy. So any emotion, continued anger, continued stress, sadness, rejection, whatever the emotion may be, a continuation of that feeling is not healthy. Now, allowing it to come in, allowing it to, you acknowledge that it's there. Wow, that was really hard to hear. People may say, "Well, how you?" And it's like I'm numb right now. I don't really have a response, and that doesn't mean. So let me clarify to those who may be family members or loved ones or people around. That does not mean that people don't care. It doesn't mean that they didn't have any emotional attachment or bond. That again is a protective factor of hearing the news or having to receive the reality of that information, and the level of pain that may bring. So the numbness again is trying to give you a process of time to allow that information to come in a slower way. Um, and it's trying to give you control over how you allow the information to come into your system. Of course, with grief, with loss, we don't get to control that. Um, but we do get to control how we release and process through it. Because again, we can stay in numbness and say, I'm going to stay locked down, I'm going to stay not feeling anything, but then that complicates and stops, literally it stops and halts the healing process and the benefit of what grief can bring. And now people are like, grief has no benefit, but it does. It does. And I've talked about this before. And it reminds me every time, and unfortunately, I've lost a lot of people in my life. Sometimes I think I get tired of, and I won't say tired, but I don't, I do feel like sometimes I get tired. So I will be honest and say sometimes I get tired of hearing that people are passing away. And I know that death is a natural part of life. But again, that reality sometimes can be like, oh my goodness, no. Can I just have a period where nobody is passing away? And that's not necessarily a reality piece, but that this is a hope that sometimes you can have, that I don't want to hear about a loved one passing away. I want us all to stay alive and stay healthy and stay enjoying life. That's not always the reality. From infancy, and not even before infancy, before babies come out, all the way up to, the elderly. People die at all ages. People die before they even truly are formed in the womb. People die when they come out of the womb. People die all the way up until, past 100. So I understand that death is a natural part of life. It's a painful part of the process, but it also can be a sobering part of the process. And numbness is also there to help you sober up to what is happening. And so again, everybody grieves different, as I said, and circumstances around it can have an impact on it. Um, so if it was tragic, and recently information that I've heard about a family member is definitely tragic. And so um, as these last few days, I've just been kind of trying to allow my system to take it in and to process. Um, I want you to know that when I'm telling you the things to help manage it, it's not things that I don't know. It's things that I know that I've actually walked through and been able to process for it myself. So acknowledge that numbness, um, and don't try to shut it down and push it away and ignore it, because again that complicates it. So just simply giving yourself the grace to acknowledge and say, "Wow, that's hard. That's painful." That's shocking, whatever the emotion may be, you can clarify for yourself and make that statement. But actually releasing that out loud. Sometimes it's hard to, I can't believe this. This is, oh my goodness, this is ridiculous, or um, this is just outrageous, sad, whatever your statement may be. Sometimes you may say, I don't even have the words for that, which was what my response has been. um, the last few days. I don't even have words right now. Um, but that's okay to even verbalize that. Is I don't have words. I'm numb. I'm shocked. I'm trying to breathe. I'm trying to again. And sometimes your system will show that because you'll see that your breath will catch, and people will be like, "Well, breathe, Theresa. You're not breathing." You're like, "Oh, I'm not. I thought I was." That's also again that response. And so when we acknowledge that, the same way you release that breath, that you release slowly, and you continue. Just like grief is like breath. Um, Sometimes it comes in and it hits you, and you're like, "Whoa, I didn't realize that that was going to be as heavy as it was." But that again, don't hold it because you hold it too long, just like a breath, it'll be stressful and it will harm you. So you have to release. You have to release. In the same way your system is going to forcibly release breath, it's going to try to definitely forcibly release any tension, any pain that you're holding on to for long periods of time, because that's not the purpose of grief. And so I didn't want this to be long. I just wanted to say to anybody who's grieving, anybody who has recently, and not even just recently, but just have had a response and can um, be able to connect with that to say, yes, I've had that response. I've felt numb and may feel numb still, and sometimes when I think about that loved one or their situation. I want you to allow yourself when the emotion hits, if there's sadness that hits or if there's anger that hits, again, don't try to go back to numbness. Allow it to allow it to flow through, even if it's in small spurts. I'm not saying that you have to be, at work and people say, I can't fall apart or, that kind of thing, but find you a safe space. And if tears is what comes up, allow the tears to flow. Um, if you need to get a hug from somebody, whatever that is, release that. I need you to release it because the trick in the initial part of grief responses is to lock it down and try to move through. No, we have to process and breathe through because the outcome of it, the sobering piece of grief, um, is to help us to cherish the memories of the loved ones, cherish the memories of those that we have lost and those that we still have here. That's the purpose. So I know it's painful because pain can be sobering. Actually, pain is very sobering. Pain helps you focus on what you've not been paying attention to. And so I hope that if there is pain, if there is numbness, that you allow yourself to process and to release the tears, release the scream if you need to, release the yell. Sometimes we don't want to do that, but that's what we may need to do because we can't lock it in our system because it will eat us up on the inside. And so, um, and I ask if you are praying people to pray for my family, um, as there are a lot of hearts that are broken and hurt right now. Um, and so that is the live for tonight, to just allow yourself to release. Don't hold it. Release it. Whether you have to talk to somebody else who understands what that pain is, um, because we don't want you to lock that hurt up. Your loved one is worth your tears, and I know that you people say, "Of course they are. They are. They're worth your tears, um, and they're worth you healing as well, and feeling whatever it is you feel." So we extend grace, and I ask for your prayers. And so that's the live for today. So just know that grief is here to do what it's meant to do, to allow us to love each other stronger, to not let moments pass and you don't say, I love you. You don't share your heart like you really want to. Live your moments. And you have heard this 1,000 times over. Live your moments like it is your last, because it just may be. Because how many times can we go back and say, I didn't know that was going to be the last time I talked to you? I thought I had one more birthday, one more Christmas, one more Thanksgiving, one more day, one more minute, one more breath. And I didn't. So while I have the breath, for those of us who are still here, while you have the breath, while you have other loved ones around you, hug them tighter, tell them you love them, um, make that phone call, forgive, and I pray that you heal as you release. Even in pain, we can heal. So thank you so much for joining us on tonight. As we breathe, acknowledge, breathe, and release. You guys have a great week. And hopefully we will see you back here on next week. Bye bye.